Welcome to Salt Mine Apologetics, where we are digging for evidence season with salt to build our defense of the hope that we have in Christ Jesus. I am Courtney Guthrie, and we are continuing our exploration of the Apostles' Creed and our defense for it. So now we understand that we have a great defense for utilizing creeds. We understand that there is no problem between science and spirituality. And this week, we're going to focus on, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. So, in researching this, I found a quote from a Templeton Prize winner, and that's somebody who advances the philanthropic vision of Sir John Templeton. And that vision is harnessing the power of the sciences to explore the deepest questions of the universe and humankind's place and purpose within it. That's quite a large goal. And I've already talked a little bit about trying to find the purpose of humankind by utilizing science and how unlikely that is. But I was very interested in Marcelo Gleiser, who won that 2019 prize, who said, "I honestly think atheism is inconsistent with the scientific method. What I mean by that is, what is atheism? It's a statement, a categorical statement that expresses belief in non-belief. I don't believe, even though I have no evidence for or against. Simply, I don't believe. Period. It's a declaration. But in science, we don't do declarations. We say, okay, you can have a hypothesis. You have to have some evidence against or for that. And so an agnostic would say, look, I have no evidence for God of any kind. What God, first of all? The Maori gods, the Jewish or Christian or Muslim God? Which God is that? But on the other hand, an agnostic would acknowledge no right to make a final statement about something he or she doesn't know about. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence and all that. This positions me very much against all of the new atheist guys, even though I want my message to be respectful of people's beliefs and reasoning, which might be community-based or dignity-based and so on. And I think obviously the Templeton Foundation likes all of this because this is part of an emerging conversation. It's not just me. It's also my colleague, the astrophysicist Adam Frank, and a bunch of others talking more and more about the relationship between science and spirituality. Well, we're not just going to talk about science. We're going to also talk about philosophy because, again, I don't bow only to science. I recognize that no matter how much science I know, there's a lot that it will not give me answers to. But I'm going to go even farther and say I think that this really, really, really smart man is a little wrong. I think there is evidence that weighs heavily in favor of there being a God. But more than that, I think the evidence, when you examine it, will, at the very least, get rid of a lot of the false gods. So for instance, mythical gods or gods that are impersonal, I think when we look at the evidence, you'll see that those gods don't fit what it would be necessary to create a universe. So stay with me. Hopefully we'll get there. Also, I want to point out that J.P. Moreland, who is a Christian philosopher and theologian, he points out the obvious contradiction of science, and that you have to start from the presupposition when you study science that there is something to study, that there is an existing universe, brain in a vat and all that. Are we brains in a vat? Just picturing all this, and it's really just our imagination. You have to presuppose that there is a universe. Recall the cup of cocoa that I mentioned in the last class. We can discuss and analyze the heat at which the cocoa has to be in order for the milk and the cocoa to combine perfectly. We can discuss what pot works best by analyzing what minerals make up a good pot. We can discuss how cold the milk has to stay. There's a lot we can learn from science, but none of that science is going to tell you how much comfort I receive from a cup of cocoa on a cold winter's night. And that was the purpose of me creating it. So, how long? I'm not really asking this of this particular group, but maybe for some people out there. How long will you go limping between two different opinions? Question Elijah asked in 1 Kings 18:21. So the people of Elijah's day really wanted to keep God and Baal. And in order to do this, they started trying to marry the two together. And Elisha said, how long are you going to keep trying to do this? It's a wasted time. There is only one God. And he has a lot more of a spine than I have, because he says, let's test them. Bring up the sacrifices. Bring up an altar. Let's do it. Let's do it right here. Let's put God against God. Something I would never, ever do, and that will not happen in this classroom. But they bring, it might. I hope not. Please don't throw me down. So they have their two altars. They lay their two animal sacrifices, and the Baal worshipers go for it. They're praying. They're crying. They're cutting. They're doing everything they can possible, to the point where I'm starting to think Elijah is the Elon Musk of his day, and he basically says, call louder. Maybe your God's on the pot right now. Maybe your God's sleeping. But no, Baal doesn't do it. Now, it should have been easy. This is a test of fire. Baal is the god of fire. He's basically giving them, hey, I'll put one hand behind my back. And then he calls upon our God. And our God gives such incredible evidence that his fire comes down and doesn't just consume the sacrifice. It consumes the entire altar. But only after he has doused that altar, not once, not twice, but 3 times with water. He had it dripping wet. It was a spit in the eye of any of those Baal worshipers. So maybe a little bit, I'm spitting in the eye of those who bow to scientism. How long will you go between two different opinions? Either God created it or he didn't. Period. Now, I'm not fighting science. I'm fighting scientism. This is where they are bowing and saying the only knowable truth can be found through science. That's the God I'm against. My God is the only way we can have true knowledge. So, I'm not going to prove God today. Nobody's going to prove God to you. The Holy Spirit will prove God in your heart, but nobody's going to prove God to you. I'm going to provide evidence, and it's going to be a lot of evidence, and it's going to be a difficult journey, so everybody put on your thinking caps, because we're going down a philosophical trial that is probably going to be beyond me. So pray for me. Are there any indications of God that could be found in the universe? I start at the beginning. Genesis 1:1-2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. In the beginning, time. Before this, no time. God, plural noun. We're immediately introduced to plurality in a singular being. Created. That is, it wasn't there before, and now it is. We call that ex nihilo, out of nothing. He created. What? The heavens. That is space. And the earth. That is matter. So I'm going to start where I'm going to end. Whatever this was, call it whatever you may. It had to be outside of time, outside of space, outside of earth. We have 3 already defining characteristics of our Creator. And as I said, we're starting philosophically. We're starting with Kalam cosmological argument. Lord be with me. Kalam. Kalam is an Arabic word, and it means speech or words. But in this particular theological or philosophical context, It is associated with the discipline of Islamic theology that deals with systematic reasoning and discourse about Islamic beliefs. Why am I bringing this up? Because Abu Hamid, I'm going to mess up your name, I'm sorry, sir, al-Ghazali, lived from 1055 to 1111. And he was starting to see the Greek philosophical trends infiltrate into Islam. And he didn't like it. So he wrote a paper called The Incoherence of Philosophers. And in this paper, he presented an argument against the Aristotelian view of an eternal universe. This is his argument. Every being which begins has a cause for its beginning. Now, the world is a being which begins. Therefore, it possesses a cause for its beginning. Dr. William Lane Craig, who is a fabulous apologist, I don't agree with everything he says, but he's way smarter than me. So if my presentation of his argument fails, I will recommend many of his videos. But he took this argument from this ancient source and he said, it doesn't quite hit the mark. And he came up with this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. This is a specific critical thinking argument structure. You have two premises that, if they are both established, naturally follow to the conclusion. If you agree with premise 1 and premises 1 and premises 2, therefore is naturally going to be the answer, the conclusion. It's a must. So, whatever begins to exist. What did I have here? All right, I guess it's here. Something cannot come from nothing. I want everyone to try to imagine a world where things can just pop into existence. And I am going the wrong way. That's the problem. There we go. My world, where things can pop into existence, would be puppy-filled. I love puppies. But I'm also somebody who can always picture the worst possible situation. In my mind, if things can pop into existence, entire worlds could pop into existence. Why aren't we seeing something just come into being right here in the middle of us, right here in the middle of me? How about a giant dinosaur that comes out of my chest like aliens or something? We don't see that. We've never seen that, not once. Not in the universe, not here on Earth. This isn't something we've seen. And actually, according to the first law of thermodynamics, nothing in the universe, for example, not matter and not energy, can pop into existence from nothing. All scientific evidence points to this. And Einstein in 1905 came up with a slightly known equation, E equals mc squared. This is a mass energy equivalence. You can change something, mass, into something else, energy, and vice versa. But in that equation, there's a conservation of those elements. So what's moving to this side of the equation is going to be equal to, so it moves back and forth. You can't have it disappear and reappear. Again, we're good. Okay. Now there is this idea that came about in 1973, quantum fluctuation. I am not a quantum physicist. I'm going to do the best I can, guys. But this physicist, Edward Tryon, published a paper in a journal called Nature. And the paper was called, Is the Universe a Vacuum Fluctuation? So he's proposing the idea that the universe came into existence by means of a large vacuum energy fluctuation. It was somewhere else and it sucked into here. Again, not a quantum mechanics person. I'm sure Mike could come up here and do a better job of explaining it than me. But here's the thing. Here's what really smart people, because I went to really smart people and thought, okay, I can't argue this, but they can. And here's their answer. This is a conversion of one type of already existing thing into another already existing. It's not bringing something out of nothing. It's something that exists, and it's converting it, like in the equation I gave you. So even somebody as dumb as me can make sense that this is still not something out of nothing. And as a matter of fact, the really, really smart person I'm going to cite said, can quantum mechanics create universes from nothing? No. Quantum particle generation requires pre-existing energy. This is not something from nothing. Could quantum mechanics spontaneously create universes from pre-existing energy? Well, there's no scientific evidence to support such a proposition, so it's just a speculation. It's just conjecture, and it's along the same lines of people who say that we came from aliens that sprouted beings on the planet. Your question should be, then where did that come from? That's great, sure, whatever. Where did that come from? Okay, then where did that come from? And you end in an infinite loop of where did that come from? And I'm going to get to why that doesn't work either. By the way, Tryon, when asked about it, said this. In answer to the question of why it happened, I offer the modest proposal that our universe is simply one of those things that happen from time to time. So even somebody really, really smart couldn't come up with an answer. And actually they did. They laughed at him. My computer just did something really weird, so let me know if you have any problems with that, Fred. So, could things just pop into existence? The answer is pretty clearly no. So our second premise is the universe began to exist. So we have things can't pop into existence. What about the universe? Is it a thing? So again, here's where it's going to get deep. Our second premise, we're going to have two arguments for. And the first argument is the argument of the impossibility of infinite past events. Really think hard with me here. Here's the argument. An actual infinite cannot exist. Mike can get up here and do a lot of equations that deal with infinite. And I'm sure mathematically we can talk about infinity. But actual infinite, right here in this universe, within the bounds of what we have, cannot exist. An infinite temporal regress of events is an actual infinite. Therefore, an infinite temporal regress of events cannot exist. This is an event. Yesterday was an event. The day before was an event. So we're talking about infinity of these. That cannot exist. So William Lane Craig demonstrates it this way. Here we go. Imagine a hotel. It has infinite rooms. That's our universe. Every room is occupied. That's our events. Infinite rooms, every room is occupied. And a new guest comes to the desk and says, I would like a room, please. Is there a room for him? Hey, Mike, what's infinity plus 1? How about we do this? Oh, we'll just move everybody down a room. Now we have room for the new guy, because infinity plus 1 is infinity. Now he brings his infinite family, infinite guest. What's infinity plus infinity? Infinity. About now your brain should be like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see this. It's like a paradox, right? You can't make it happen. It doesn't make sense. The rooms were filled already. How are you getting more rooms? It's a thing. You can't make infinite things. Are we okay with that argument? Excellent. What's our next argument? Successive addition. This is still part of the same argument. This is your second look at the same idea. This is the impossibility of forming an actual infinite by successive addition. A collection formed by successive addition cannot be an actual infinite. The temporal series of events is a collective formation of successive addition. Therefore, the temporal series of events cannot be an actual infinite. All right, so here's how we're going to try to work this one out. We're right here, right now, and you all get to live forever. Now, starting at 0, count backwards by whole numbers, and you can go for infinity. This is something you can kind of picture. Forever, I live forever, 0, -1, -2, -3, and you're doing that forever. Now stop and start going forward. You're at negative infinity. Turn around, come back. Your brain, I just think I heard everybody's brain go, argh! No, wait, can't do that. You can't start from a negative infinity to count up to 0, and we are at 0. Here we are right now at this event at 0, and you can't make it. So we can't go back to the back of an infinity. That's not going to happen. It's impossible, not actually. Theoretically, sure. Well, do we see it in science? Something called the second law of thermodynamics. And here's where I'm kind of wanting to just hand off the mic. The second law of thermodynamics is typically expressed, there's multiple forms, but in relation to entropy. And it's stated like this: in a closed system, the entropy, a measure of disorder or randomness, tends to increase over time. Systems naturally evolve toward a state of greater disorder. They move from order to a greater state of disorder, naturally. So we're dealing with relationships between heat and work and energy, and this is what naturally tends to happen in a closed system. So how does that relate? Going to tell the story, I know Mike was like, what? When I told this story to him, of Einstein's little lamb. That's what we call it in apologetics, so we can remember it. In 1917, Albert Einstein introduced a cosmological constant into his equations of general relativity so that he could achieve a static universe. And he represented this cosmological constant with lambda, Einstein's little lamb. So what happened, though, was people started to realize that the static universe idea needed to be abandoned. They chucked it. Matter of fact, I think, if I remember correctly, Einstein said it was the biggest blunder of his career, this trying to make a static universe. But regardless, in the 1920s, a man named George Lemaitre and another man named Alexander Friedmann, independently, completely separately, but using Einstein's equations, developed mathematical models that described an expanding universe. And along comes Edwin Hubble's observational work. You'll know Hubble's telescope. And he's discovering something called a redshift of distant galaxies' light spectra. And that's kind of building into this evidence of the universe expanding. But there was some skepticism, some derision. Somebody came up with this term, the Big Bang, sarcastically, jokingly. It stuck. His name was Fred. Not that Fred. Different Fred. It was in the 1940s. So he was criticizing it, but it stuck. We still use Big Bang today. And lo and behold, in the 20th century, more evidence comes forward of this expanding universe. Arvin Board, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, building upon these earlier contributions, developed a mathematical, theoretical work that if the universe has anything, it has a beginning. And their theorem highlighted the inevitability of a singularity, a moment where it started. So, how does the thermodynamics really equate? I decided to use my cup of cocoa again. Except I said coffee in there. It would probably be a hot cup of cocoa, but we'll go with coffee. So, do what? Both. We'll go see what you want to see. It's hot tea for some of you. Anyway, so we've heated up our cup of cocoa. We've taken it into a cooler room. The second law implies that certain processes are irreversible. So if you take your hot cocoa into a cool room, it will cool down. it will not spontaneously heat back up. You would have to introduce more energy into that equation to heat it back up again. It's dispersing it out into the room. It's growing to an equilibrium with the room. Does that make sense? Everybody's experienced this, right? So, in a system with low entropy, the components are more ordered and structured, and high entropy implies greater disorder. The expanding universe, closer to the Big Bang, was denser, more ordered. Expanding out, it's associated with an increase in volume, decrease in energy, like our cup of coffee, and aligns with that second law of thermodynamics. Cosmic wave, microwave background noise, or CMB. This radiation provides evidence for a early, I'm having trouble with my words today, with an early, hot, and dense state to the universe, another indicator of something being a singularity. As the universe expands, this radiation undergoes that redshift that I mentioned earlier from Edwin Hubble's telescope. And this CMB is often considered a form of the thermo-equilibrium, just like our little cup of cocoa. So the bottom line is that the second law of thermodynamics, and here's where Mike's really going to lose it, says that if we had an infinite universe, then the energy would have already reached equilibrium. How's that? Because I originally said for us who are just lay people, it would have been used up. It'd be done. But we still see it. We still see it moving out. We still see it expanding. It would have already reached its point. There's no point at which it could have started and not reached its equilibrium at this point. You'd have to have an eternally sourced energy supply. Did that make sense? Kinda? I'll go back to my philosophical argument. You can't have an actual infinite.
I would say you broke out through something called
heat death. Look that one up, guys.
Yeah, Google it. The heat death.
Excellent.
Would have already occurred.
So I said at the beginning, I would tell you what this all points to. What can we take away? Well, the universe has a cause, and that cause must have attributes that could create it. And as I've already hinted at, it has to be spaceless, not inside of our space. Now, typically when I say something must be spaceless, people think, oh, you've got a planet here and you've got a planet here and there's this nothing in between, but that's not really true. There's something there. No, it has to be outside of that. Space isn't spaceless, if that makes sense. It's not empty. There's something there. So it has to be outside of that. It has to be timeless, something we know as eternal. Because it created time, it has to be outside of it. It has to be immaterial. It created matter, so it cannot be made of matter. You see, we're starting to get rid of things like Brahma or the universe itself being God. It must be uncaused. If it's caused, then it too must have its own cause. So it must be uncaused. This one's pretty obvious. It must be powerful. And lastly, this one I'm going to argue further in the next slide. It must be personal. That means it's going to have a will, it's going to have an intelligence, and it's going to want to create this thing. It's going to have a plan, a design. To me, that sounds a lot like the God of our Holy Bible, and a lot less like the mythical gods that are either created from other gods or are not really thinking, willful beings. And that takes us to constants and quantities. Constants are numbers that determine the physical characteristics of the universe, and quantities are the initial conditional values of the universe and dictate how the laws of science work. There is something called a finely tuned point where all these numbers have to be perfect in order for our universe to exist and in order for us to be within that universe. So for example, we have gravity, which is on there, but it's really, really small. It's 6.67 times 10 to the negative 11, and that gravitational force is constant. A smaller gravitational force by 1 part in 10 to the 60 or larger by 10 to the 60, that's 60 zeros afterwards, would have either exploded too quickly for stars to form or collapsed back on itself too quickly for life to evolve. That little thing there that looks like a 1 slash and then a line is the 60 zeros I was talking about. 1 part in that, and we lose it. So this gravitational force must be weak compared to other forces for life to have it naturally evolve, but it still has to be there at a specific amount. It's really temperamental, but it's not the only one. Oops, let's go look at the other one before I get past it. Cosmological constant, which I mentioned earlier. This is a parameter describing the energy density of the vacuum, and it must be within 1 in 10 to the 53rd. That is 1 part in 100 million, billion, 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 billion. Slightly outside of that range, we lose matter. Other examples, the electromagnetic force. Change to that would end life. That's the nuclear force. And if we lose 1 part in 10,000 billion, 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 that's 10 to the 40, that would tear apart atoms. Increasing the mass of a neutron by 1 part in 700 would end nuclear fusion, and we'd have no energy source for life. Energy expansion of the universe changed by 1 part in 10 to the 120th. That ends all possibility of life. The mass and energy of the early universe required even distribution or a charge of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd. It's a lot of zeros. Otherwise, we have a universe that's hostile to life. One expert cited 30 separate physical or cosmological parameters that are required precise tuning for life to be sustainable. 30. Which made Lee Strobel say this: in light of the infinitesimal odds of getting all the right dial settings for the constants of physics, the forces of nature, and other physical laws and principles necessary for life, it seems fruitless to try to explain away all this fine-tuning as merely the product of a random happenstance. It's like finding rocks that spell out welcome and assuming that it all happened naturally. Now, I've given you painted rocks, but you can't even think of it like that. This is like rocks that actually form a W and form an E. Now, imagine we're walking down the beach and you come across that. Do you immediately go, well, you know, given enough time, one rock comes in? That is their God. Their God is just give it enough time. And they're saying that we're the God of the gaps, but I would say their God of the gaps is time. No, it was longer than that. But it couldn't have happened in this amount of time. Well, it was longer than that. So what does God say? Oh, let me give you the actual argument. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either necessity, chance, or design. It's not due to necessity or chance. Therefore, it must be design. That's your official argument. So, what did God say? Jeremiah 10:12. It is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and his understanding stretched out the heavens. And I've used this one before. Romans 1:20. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. I think there's a ton of evidence, not just for God, but for our God, to take that. That's it for today. Next week, we will be talking about our evidence for Jesus and his resurrection, or what I call the historicity of Jesus. And then that will be it for this Salt Mine Apologetics session. Thank you so much for coming. You at home, thank you for showing up. Please subscribe, like, and love. I don't know, whatever you can do out there.